another way to remedy the situation where the door has to support some type of weight. But this video is long enough, and we're going to have to see what I do in a future video. What's going on, you guys? Welcome back. When I was planning out this Reborn project, which is my 1974 Chevy Nova Custom, I didn't only have plans for the exterior, which includes the bodywork and the paintwork, or the interior cabin, which includes the reupholstery of the seats, the carpeting, the rear package tray, the dashboard, etc. Or the engine bay, which includes that 454 engine, the smooth out firewall, relocation of the wiper motor, and various other details to give that engine bay a rebirth. I also had plans for the trunk. Now, in the beginning of this video, you've seen a clip of what the trunk looked like back in 2012. Let's face it, it's just not pretty. It wasn't very appealing. I did paint it with rubberized undercoating, but this car's plan was to be a daily driver, aka cruiser, which also meant that I was going to use the trunk for things like groceries or other stuff. But what I found is using the trunk was pretty awkward. I mean, you can see in that video that the trunk had a lot of dips and valleys. It just wasn't flat, and it just made it very awkward to put stuff in the trunk. Now, the trunk for me was an important investment project. It wasn't only to make it look better, but it was also to protect all the hard work I put into making those quarter panels nice and straight. It took a lot of work, a lot of hours, a lot of effort to make those quarter panels nice and straight. And so when you put things in the trunk on these cars, they can shift around, and because they're completely open, these things could just crash into the inside of the quarter panels and just ruin them. And I wanted to work on the trunk not only to make it look better, but also to protect my investment in time and effort to make those panels nice and pretty. So back in episode 126, I show that I had plans to make a storage compartment to fill in the hole that was on the trunk floor, which was meant for a little small spare tire back in '74. So I did that, but I never did give a follow-up video to the plans for the trunk. Now, the storage compartment wasn't the only plan I had for the trunk. That was just one little piece of the overall pie of what I had up here envisioned for the trunk. And so at the end of 126, I stated that we'll just have to see in the future what I come up with. Well, we're in the future. And now I can finally show you what I did to the trunk to give it a rebirth. So without further ado, let's get into the video and show you what I actually did to give this trunk some reborn love. This is the original structure of the floor, and we can see that the floor is not symmetrical in any way. Originally, the storage compartment was an attempt at making the floor a bit more flat. To make it more flat, I had to relocate the battery again. I never really liked the fact that it was on the side of the trunk. It did not look clean to me. So I decided to relocate it further into the trunk, where the trunk space was hardly ever used, near the back seat. I welded brackets to the trunk floor for the 2 bolts of the battery tray and drilled holes to bolt the battery tray to the trunk floor. It's not going anywhere. With the battery out of the way, I can now focus on the trunk floor itself. I spent a lot of time researching the 73-74 hatchback models, and I found that the hatchbacks had flat trunks and had the same trunk floor I had. So I now know that the hatchbacks had a false floor suspended over the trunk floor.
I decided to simulate how I was going to create my own false floor. I took some cardboard and started to mock up the new floor. I used a piece of wood to go across the floor to ensure it was flat. I then added my back wall mock-up template to get an idea of how it would look. You can also see that I added extra panels on the floor to see how I was going to continue making the false floor all the way to the tail panel. I took my floor template and transferred it over to some 1/2-inch plywood. I used the same piece of wood to cross over from left to right, suspending the false floor above the trunk floor. Notice that I made this portion of the false floor stop at a certain distance from the back wall or back seat. There is a reason for this, as you will see as I progress with this project. To support the new plywood, I decided to make a steel skeleton. Since the trunk floor has a lot of imperfections, the steel supports had to be cut and welded one by one. As I stated earlier, the first panel was cut strategically. Beyond that point, the trunk floor slopes downward slightly. The new floor also slopes ever so slightly downward. So I started to make the skeleton open up wider to accept the wider false floor section. Then I made my second panel. The two parts join and allow the entire trunk floor to be flat. Here is the finished skeleton support for the false floor. Notice how it gets wider to accept the wider panel. This ensures adequate support for the entire floor. Now I needed to add in braces for studs so I can screw the new subfloor onto the frame. Here's a couple of the L bracket tabs used to hold the studs in place. Here's a shot of all the studs. I numbered them so I know where each one goes on the frame. Now this brings me to the second part of the compartment project featured in episode 126.
Now, I wanted to touch up a little bit on episode 126 project idea and this video's project idea. Now, in episode 126, if you watch the video, you see I was just basically utilizing a hole in the trunk floor and trying to make it flat with the addition of using that hole. Basically, the trunk storage idea was based around the hole that was already in the floor for the spare tire that normally the 74s came with back in 1974, which was a very small tire and there was no way I was going to use it. So that space in the floor was useless to me, and I wanted to somehow incorporate that hole and at the same time make the trunk a little bit more flat. Now, seeing that video back in 126, you notice that I had a very thin press board, and I show it at the end of the video and I'm flexing it, and that press board was an 1/8 inch. And the reason why I was using an 1/8 inch originally was because I didn't want to limit the amount of space I have to store things in there, like a little jack or some tools or, something. If I would have used a 3/4 inch piece of plywood or 1/2 inch piece of plywood over the original trunk storage compartment, then it would have been useless as well. And the whole project, it would have been done for nothing. Basically, I would have made that for nothing because I couldn't put nothing in it. So that's where the project failed. Now, with this project, after I started doing research on the 73, 74 models that were hatchback, and I noticed that they have a suspended floor, that made the project come back to life. The trunk storage compartment project, it came back to life because now I have additional height to work with. And that is where the difference between 126 and this video, that's the big difference why this one is a success and where 126 was kind of like a failure. Now, when I did it, and of course, it took 2 years for me to figure out how to remedy that situation with the trunk floor where I wanted it flat and I wanted a storage compartment. It took 2 years, but in those 2 years that I used the car and used the trunk, I never really used that compartment. So I did all that work for nothing. And so in this video, you see that in the end, all the work that I put into making that storage compartment did eventually become useful, but only because I was now able to use more trunk height to complete my new design. So in this design where the trunk floor is now flat, I also now have a nice chunk of space to put in a jack or some tools or anything like that. Now it was actually useful.
Now with the new trunk floor, I can finally finish what I started. I made a mock-up for the compartment out of cardboard. I redesigned it for the new height. Then the new compartment addition template was then made out of 3/4 inch MDF. I chose MDF because it's easy to shape via sanding. Then I removed the compartment addition and the skeleton frame from the car to paint them with oil-based paint. This was to protect the MDF from moisture and the skeleton from rust. The trunk was lined with sound deadening material. I wanted to ensure that the space in between the subfloor and the trunk floor would not resonate much sounds. And here's a look at the subfloor skeleton with supports installed in the trunk of my Nova. Now it was time to finalize the storage compartment. The spacing on the sides of the compartment was for bracing it to the frame with the use of wood. I screwed the compartment to the steel frame. With the new compartment fixed in position, I can now work on cutting out the opening. Now it's looking like a storage compartment. Don't forget to smash that like button. I then cut myself a door out of some shelving material I had, which was a lot stronger against flexing than the plywood. The razor blade is ensuring that the door does not stay closed since it's flush with the level of the floor. I did not want to see the hinges, so I bought a pair of concealed hinges for the door. There's one more thing to install, and that was the handle for the door. I wanted a recess handle, so I found this folding pull handle in stainless steel.
Well, that concludes the trunk storage portion of the trunk modification that I wanted to do way back in 2012, but couldn't do because, well, I didn't think about doing a whole new floor. So you see how it all came together and it's coming out really, really nice. Now there's still a lot more left to do. The trunk modification where I actually made a new floor, I still need to cover the sides to protect my quarter panels. And of course, the area where I moved the battery is no longer going to be considered a trunk, so there's going to be another part added to that area as well. And of course, I need to tie it all together and make it look like a finished custom trunk. All of that will be featured in the next video, so if you don't want to miss it, hit that subscribe button, and of course do not forget the notification bell so that as soon as I load that video you get notified and you can watch what I had up here being put in my trunk, and you can finally see it all come together. And hit that like button. Don't forget that like button. Just a little click and we're golden. It lets me know that I'm doing a good job showing you what I did to my Nova, and of course it keeps the channel going, and it just lets other people find the channel that much more easier. It's for the YouTube algorithm, basically. So I hope that I pretty much explained clearly what I was trying to do. Of course, this video is with pictures because it was done way back in 2014, but the explanation is the same, and I'm hoping that it was clear enough. If you have questions or comments, please leave them down below because I do read them, and of course I answer every single one of them. I also want to give a special shout out to any one of you guys out there watching this video that have a 73 or 74 Chevy Nova, and a special shout out for the hatchback models, because without the hatchback models I would not have figured out what to do for my storage compartment idea, and I wouldn't have gotten as far as I've gotten if I didn't find out about the hatchback models. So special shout out to you guys out there, and hope you enjoyed. Thank you very much for watching.